Hi, folks. We're just going to give everyone a few moments to trickle in. Just another minute, and then we will be getting started. All righty, everyone. I think we are going to get started. Thank you so much for coming to our session today, where we are really excited to dive into part two after a ton of popular demand last year around breaking down this topic even more and just really getting into the nitty gritty with Adrian diving into the calculations and all the fun stuff. It's always great to see a number of you all who I've worked with in the past and some new faces. I am Valerie, and I'm on the product marketing team here at Assembled. And I'll pass it along to my teammate Adrian to give an intro on himself.
Hi there. Thanks, Val. Yes, I'm Adrian. I'm the workforce manager on the solutions team, and I see this every time, but it's probably more appropriate this time. I hope a lot of you are joining again, so it's great to see some familiar names since this is a part two, and really happy to dive in and go through what we didn't cover fully in the first part of this session.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adrian. Just a couple of little housekeeping items. So, firstly, if you have any questions for us, the best way to send those in is using the questions button on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. That will allow us to get to your questions in the most timely manner possible. Also, we'll be sending out polls throughout the webinar. We just love to spark discussion and really get to know you all, know your roles, how you heard about this event, and so much more. So we actually just released a poll around how you heard about this session today. Finally, we'll be sending out the recording promptly after this webinar, as well as a link to the latest and greatest template created by Adrian, as well as a kickoff of capacity planning services, which Adrian will go into more towards the end of the webinar. I'll kick it off to you, Adrian, to take us through the rest.
All right. Thanks again, Val. All right, so let's jump in here and go over what we'll cover. So in the first part, we went over the inputs. Obviously, we went into the spreadsheet for the first time. Those inputs were focused around our demand, so the forecasting of the volume, things that are going to go into your Erlang calculation. And then we touched a little bit on the supply with your people here. That's what we are going to also touch on more today. And then now we will have the ability to go out and take this spreadsheet and be like, can we turn this into a hiring plan? Can we look forward and see when are we going to be understaffed? And then, of course, bump some costs up against that. And we'll go through with the example on the spreadsheet. And as Val mentioned just a little earlier with the latest and newest version, I have made a couple changes to the spreadsheet. I know that last time we sent out the wrong link first, and then a lot of you requested access, and I was able to follow up with the link to the one that we were using live last time. And we will include that same link. It's the same exact link to the spreadsheet, and I will show you quickly if you wanted to bring over the new things that I added, how you can quickly do that without redoing any work you may have already done on the spreadsheet itself. So a couple more housekeeping items there, but happy to jump in. I, of course, want to go through and do a recap here because we covered a lot just 1 week, 8 days ago. And hopefully people have been using this and getting some use out of the actual tool itself. So I'm happy to jump in and answer some quick questions there, see if there's anything that is still confusing before we jump in. So just to give that overall recap of what is capacity planning composed of, this is that high level view, right? There's just a million different parts to each of these parts here, but if you wanted to break it down into the real simple parts, it's that demand versus supply calculation, staffing being your supply, the supply of people, of something that you are bringing to bear against the workload. And of course, in the capacity planning here, we're looking at supply that is a finite resource. The reason I bring that up is something that we've been discussing internally, and it's probably been on a lot of people's minds as well, is there's a lot of recent talk about bots and things like that will take over, or at least part, not if not all, part of the service space, and even doing some sort of triage. That ideally is not a finite resource. You don't have to forecast as much for it because you can just spin up more instances of that. We're working on the actual people, the ones who really get the answer and really know how to solve that problem. That's our supply. And then, of course, the demand or the workload comprised of volume, handle times, SLA targets, so on and so forth. So we will be working on that. But let's go ahead and see, what did we learn last time? I just covered a lot of this as well, and I've covered this up here. But just who remembers what are some of the inputs and the goal outputs that we're trying to get from this? Does anybody want to pop into the chat with some things that they remember from last time? I'll give 30 seconds or so for that. Hopefully everybody was prepared for a quiz in the morning, although it may not be that early in the morning where everybody is. All right, I see a little bit of typing here. We'll give it another second. Yep, demand and supply. Yes, that is definitely the big one that we were trying to extrapolate out over a much longer time period and at that weekly view. Hiring plans and costs. Yep, great. Another good one there. All right, and then that's going to be great on the outputs there. And let's see if I can get my little example to pop in here. So just exposing everything that we had there on the last screenshot. You can see customer base, CPC, volumes, handle time baseline, seasonality, workload hours, launches. There's so many different things that can go into the actual workload. It's okay if you don't remember all of these. That's why we have spreadsheets. That's why we have recordings. That's why we have slide decks we can go back and look at, because there's a lot to remember. But I'm glad that the basics are still there and have stuck so that we can go ahead and start building off of that. So let's jump in here to the actual supply side. And just like last time, we will go back and forth between the actual slides here and then the spreadsheet as well to give some examples, and I will open it up for questions as that goes through. So for the supply, this is going to be the people side, something that is a finite resource that we have to manage ourselves as workforce managers. We're looking at, you're going to start off with some sort of staff amount. And I'll show you how in this model, you actually start off with, for every line of business, a staffing number, and then the model takes it from there. What that means is that instead of every week you're putting in the amount of staff, it is actually going to go ahead and try to break that out for you. And the first thing that it does is we're going to look at your attrition, and we're going to look at your annualized attrition. So that's just basically the amount of employees that you expect to turn over in a year, broken down into the weekly view that we're looking at here. Ideally, you're going to get this from something like your workforce system, like Assembled, or even your HR system. And you can take the last 12 months, divide the number of attrited agents by the average number of employees. That's going to give you how many people left over the amount of people that you have, get your annualized attrition number. And then the way that I've done it in this sheet is you just take that and put it into 52 parts for one every single part of the week. So that's a big part there. This is your attrition, and it's something that a lot of people we found, and myself especially, have run across this. That doesn't always get looked at enough when you're just trying to survive on the day-to-day. I've got to get my service level set for next week. I have to make sure I have overtime. I have to explain what happened in the last week and so on and so forth. And attrition is kind of that silent force that is always working in the background. And I do want to point out that attrition, I'm calling kind of everything lumped into attrition of people moving out of this queue, but it does not have to be a negative thing. That you can have positive attrition, people getting promoted and moved on, which is great. That's exactly what we want to see. And then there is negative attrition, but people find better jobs. They have to move on. They do other things. The important part is that we are measuring it and we are accounting for it and we are adjusting our targets based off of that. So we'll jump in here in just a second and see what that looks like. One thing that, let's see if I can, there we go, hide my little notice there, is that the math here in the spreadsheet is breaking it down to, you might have fractional agents or even less than like one person of attrition each week. And that's fine. If you have low attrition and you're running just single digit percentages for the entire year, you may not have a person that turns over every single week. And that's great. I'll show you how the sheet's actually keeping a running total until there is basically a full person that would assume to be attrited out. And then it will go ahead and plot it into that point. And that's going to be great if you're running that lower amount of attrition. There are some businesses, some cases. I've definitely worked with BPOs in the past that have had attrition numbers that have gotten up close to 100% attrition in the year. So it does happen. These things it's normal in business for that to happen. We're just wanting to check on it and go after it. So let me go ahead and jump over to the capacity planning sheet now and kind of showing what's going to be happening here with some of the shrinkage, or excuse me, some of the attrition that we have seen last time. So this should all look pretty familiar. And I see that there may be some people in here as well with the anonymous animals up top. So that is great. So there is a shrinkage percentage. I just plopped in 30%, or excuse me, an attrition percentage. I plopped in 50% onto here, basically so that I could make sure that the spreadsheet would actually give me some numbers without having to make the numbers too terribly large to start off with. And what's happening here on line 25 is you can see that 50% shrinkage broken down into once every 52 weeks is going to start to chip away at the head count. This is the same head count that we have established on row 9 here. And it starts to chip away at the head count. And you can see it's 9.9, then 9.81, and so on and so forth. And it is not until, and this is just the way that I do the logic, you can set this up in any way because that's the beauty of it being in a spreadsheet. It's a formula. You can change it. You can modify it. You can move it around. Heck, move it around, modify it, and then send me back a copy and be like, hey, Adrian, look at this. I changed this. What do you think of that? I'm happy to see that and see what people are doing with these sort of things. But once again, if we could round it down to a person, the system just assumes, okay, probably we had one person go ahead and have some sort of attrition here, and that we need to account for that. And then the system will actually go ahead and take it down one full head count because we don't have partial people, and we'll go from there. So that's attrition outlined with probably some complex parts, but the nice thing is it's all set up in here for you. So if you want, you can just literally do the inputs and then just let the system do it for you and never have to go back in and really worry about it that much. One follow-up part, though, that I do want to point out, and we'll be touching on this as one of the last points that I have in this session, is that it is important to go back and maybe keep an actual version of this sheet as well. Right? We want to compare our plans to what has actually happened. This in your actual staffing may be one of the times that I would suggest you might put actuals into your live sheet. I just said a lot of things, which maybe everybody's going to be like, what are you talking about, Adrian? This is confusing. You're contradicting yourself. What I mean is that if the system assumes that you are going to lose a person on this week and you don't lose a person on that week and you're still at 10 people, you can go ahead and just change that number to the 10. And then the basically the counter for the attrition will go over. Or maybe instead of having one person attrit here, you had, one each week going on and you need to kind of adjust it down. That is fine. You can adjust this row. The formulas will update and just kind of build off of what you've done there. That is one of the real key ones to just make sure that you are aware of, because the system's going to do its best to estimate, but it's not going to be perfect. It may need some fine tuning there. So that's your attrition, a general overview of it, and then breaking out how the sheet looks at it here. Are there any questions on this part? And I'll give a break to let people ask or go for some clarification here.
Yes, Adrian, we did have a question that actually came in a bit earlier before you started sharing the spreadsheet. So this one says, can you show me how to read how many are needed if you put a starting head count at 0? Meaning if you want to answer a question of how many full-time employees are needed based on all assumptions. Lastly, for volume, if it changes each week, should we just use averages to get the accurate full-time employee headcount for next year or for the year?
Okay, great. And I'm just going to, if it changes each week, should we just use the average headcount for the year? Okay, great question. So going back to my point before of this is a spreadsheet and it's ours to mess around with. Let's try. Let's put 0 in here and have 0 to start with and see what happens. Give the system a little bit. Okay, so here we go. You can see it's automatically going to give us kind of a delta of FTEs based off of the other inputs that we've got, that people work 42.5 hours per week, because we know about 2.5 of those are unpaid for lunch, and the shrinkage percentages and things like that. So I did not round these, but you can also round these numbers, and you can see right away we're about 16 people under. But then maybe it's about 13 people once our new hires hit the next week. We remember from last time, the way that this sheet's looking at it is the new hires give us a smaller amount of productive hours per week because, well, they're new hires, they're learning. And then you can see as it goes along here, the volumes come up. So now we have a little bit of a higher deficit. And this is just because I was playing with the volumes up and down. They probably won't be so, up and down for you. It will. You can see the deltas built out from there, which is a really important point. And you can actually see how everything's working through. We had 5 people in a class here, 10 people in a class here. Some of our inputs with our volumes and our handle times and things dropped later on. And we actually go, when they graduate, because they slide up here, we actually go to a tiny surplus of people. We've got about, let's say, 2 people's worth of surplus here, which is not a lot going on. So I would almost kind of say that that's not a comfortable surplus in my head, especially when attrition may take a person away based off of what we've seen not that long after that, and with the volumes being higher. So hopefully that answers your first part of your question there. You can definitely go ahead and plot in 0 if you wanted to and just get an idea of what you'll need. And then for the average, yes, if it goes up and down throughout the year, you can take the average employees and just average out the week to see what you're going to need. Just be aware that if you're averaging that out and you have some sharp growth, it may be, especially if it's like really weighted at the end of the year, your average may be lower than kind of like what you're ending the year at with your momentum going into the next year. So it may be kind of interesting to tell somebody, oh, our average employee need is 50, but really at the end of the year, because we had this sharp growth, it's 80. So you kind of maybe want to have both of those to counterbalance your points there. Great question though. Are there any others that popped in, Val?
I do not see any others in the questions icon, but feel free, y'all, to continue to pop them in, and we'll have some pauses throughout to make sure they are answered.
All right. Well, back to the slides then. Okay, so we've covered attrition. The next thing is hiring. So we just saw this a little bit here. Not all of this is fully fleshed out in there because it is a bit unique to every company. So not every single part is fleshed out in the spreadsheet. But the big things that you want to pay attention to are your time to source, your time to train, and your time to full productivity. Like I said, I did not build all of these out specifically in the spreadsheet, but they are things that can be added on. You saw how easy it was to just tweak and move things around. And the cost, which I'll go over, that was great feedback from last time. It took me all of 2 minutes to add on once you understand kind of how the spreadsheet's doing the math. So not terribly complicated. But your time to source. This is an important one because people think, we actually ran into some clients last year that we were chatting with. And they'd say, oh, well, our people take 8 weeks in class, so we need to be looking for them 2 months in advance. Well, this is something that actually happened to us at Stripe is we had some of our smaller BPOs, just for the fact that there weren't a lot of people around the area, it would take 8 weeks to fill an entire class maybe being like 10 or 15 people. So really, instead of it being, okay, there's an 8-week work back, now it was 16 weeks. So we're looking at about 4 months of work back there. And if it's any longer than that, or even that amount of time, you might be needing your Q4, getting into your holiday stuff. You might be having to actually start to put into motion and get that hiring system kicked off in the summertime. So when you're all out at the beach and there's sun out, you're already starting to think about when it's going to be cold and snowy, and we got to get people hired in to handle all of that. So it's just kind of shifting the mindset, and that's what this sheet will help you look at to, oh my gosh, when am I actually going to be under, and how far back should I look from that? We saw in the spreadsheet that there is the actual class time that comes in, which is the particular like time they would be ramping up in there. And you can just kind of work back and count back a few weeks to, oh, I know it takes about 2 weeks, it takes 4 weeks, it takes 8 weeks to find that much class. Here's when I should actually be looking for it and building out from there. So that's your time to source. Of course, your time to train is the amount of time that they're going to be spending in training. We can't expect people to, come right off the street and just jump right in. As much as that would be awesome, they are not going to have access to the systems. They are not going to be proficient in any of the things until they have actually gone through some training. So that's another set of weeks. I'll go back to, examples from my past. And the reason I used 8 weeks is because T-Mobile used to give you 8 weeks of paid training to start off with in a classroom setting, very, very structured. So it is something that happens out there. 8 weeks is not an outlier, at least what I have seen. And then finally, the time to full productivity. Now, this one gets a bit more complicated, and I did not build it specifically in because it can get really complicated really fast. But this is when people are out of training and they go and they graduate to the production floor. Right now, we're just kind of moving them up into, this is our headcount. This is our full-time employees. That's great. If you wanted to go for extra accuracy, and you can take a look back at your different cohorts back in the past, and see, all right, when they graduate, they've had 8 weeks, they've gotten better. They probably are not up to full speed. There's plenty of things, including just nerves of kind of being on your own a little bit when you hit the production floor. So then they might take a bit longer. And if your target is 8 minutes of talk time, maybe they're at 10 minutes, and there's kind of a curve down as they get better and better and closer to the baseline goal. This actually ties back to why I had baseline average handle time kind of built into there. So this is a very complicated way of saying, if you really wanted to get advanced, if you really want to build that in, you might have a weighted average of these handle times with a particular like glide path where they go from maybe that 10 minutes to the 8 minutes of handle time that's there. In reality, it is not going to make a very, very large difference unless there is a huge gap from when people graduate to when they actually get productive. And it takes 6 months, and they're, it takes them 3 times as long when they start. But I would also counter that by saying maybe the training should be adjusted so that they're not, taking 3 times as much time to start off with, and it's a lesser gap. So that is the hiring plans, things like that. We just touched on that before, but I will go into the spreadsheet if there are no questions about this slide before I jump in and kind of show what I was talking about here. Do we have any questions, Val?
We just had a question pop into the chat. How about tier 1 versus tier 2 agents? They have different AHTs.
That's a great question. So this would be similar to if you wanted to map out specifically when your graduates move up into production, do they have a different handle time? Now, the way that I've traditionally done tier 1 and tier 2 is that they are usually different queue types. As in tier 2, a lot of the times, if they get direct routed to them, and let's just call them tier 2, premium, whatever it is, it's an elevated level of support. If they get direct routed to them It's probably a small amount of volume because you don't exactly want to flood your tier 2. It's probably more expensive. They need more training, so on and so forth. So then the other one is there's probably a lot of transfer volume from other departments that gets into tier 2. So in that case, I would say make another copy of this for your tier 2. So you have tier 1 with all of their inputs, and then tier 2 with all of their inputs, and you have them working side by side. That way you're not blending it as much. If you do specifically have tier 2 agents that are working in the same group of work that you see here, then yeah, you may want to break it out where you have basically a separate staff row here, and then you can just modify the spreadsheet to have maybe different inputs on the side and a different staff group. I know I'm just kind of getting hand wavy with, you can just change the spreadsheet, things like that. That's what we're here to help with, and why if anybody does want to actually take advantage of working with me to build these out, we can go down that path. But the easier way might be to just have a tier 1 sheet and a tier 2 sheet, or multiple tabs on the same sheet, and you sum them up together. So hopefully that answers the question. Have any others popped in, Val?
No others from what I've seen, but we are actually going to send out another quick poll to just get a sense of our audience. So I'm going to send that out right now.
Great. Thanks, Val. And while y'all are looking at the poll too, I'll just go over in practice how this is starting to work here. So remember, we were just talking about time to source, time to train, and then of course the time to full productivity, which isn't exactly represented in this sheet. And you can see here the delta of hours and the delta of FTE that we saw before. This is something that was brought up in that question before. Can you change it to 0? And it gives you the amount of people needed. And that's awesome. So the thing here is I've set this up where we're not actually going to see a deficit for a while, but I'm going to scroll forward and try not to make anybody motion sick with how fast I'm going to scroll. But you can see this row, the amount of people, our delta is going down. So if that's just attrition building in, something that we just covered. If we truly did start to see a deficit, we can go back and start to plot in our additional classes. So let's say, and let me see if I can just do this and pick a number that'll make a deficit. So let's do 600,000 customer base for this week. It's probably going to make us go understaffed once everything calculates. I did not put enough people there. So we'll go for 999,999. And see, this is what happens when you try to do spreadsheets live. Is sometimes you don't exactly get the right amount of numbers. And we're still positive. So 0.20. Let's just make some ridiculous number and get something to, and that is not percentage. So that is going to make it crazy big. But the point is here that we are going to start to see a deficit. Here we go. We're 1,500 people underneath. So something just happened. The sun exploded or something. There's a big issue here. But the point is we now have a deficit to work against. So we can go in and start to see the classes that we need to put in. So we're obviously not going to add 1,500 people. But if we go back to our view over here, we had set up that new hires are in training for 5 weeks. So we can just count back the 5 weeks. And let me just make sure I do this right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we should have 5 specific weeks. So I might have to put them here, and then they graduate on the 6th week. Let's just check this out. But I'm going to plot in 10 more people. And you will see that it is going to start to build out some of our staffing here, the actual new hires. And then when they graduate, obviously 10 people is not going to make a dent against this minus 1,500 people deficit. But what happened, if you saw this update, the system goes ahead, puts them in for that amount of time. We get some hours, they graduate up. We went to 33 people, and so on and so forth. So the point is, if this wasn't some crazy deficit, so 0.2% instead, we will actually see, okay, hey, maybe we need a bigger class than 10 people. Maybe we need a smaller class. So 10 people is going to put us in a bit of a surplus. Maybe we don't want to do that. Maybe we'll do 8 and get more of a real life example. So, okay, eight's pretty close, 2.5 people. I'll go with that. So now we know we should put 8 people around, this is the beginning of April. And then we can just count back on the weeks it takes to source them. So if it takes another couple of weeks, we could say, actually, we need to bring them in. We need to make sure that our sourcing efforts and everything are started by the beginning of March. and there's our work back. So a couple different ways to get into here. You saw this is yellow, which is something that we had covered in the first time. It is an input that we are expecting you to go in and adjust, and you can play around with these and move them around. This is actually something that is great for your scenario planning and so on and so forth. But another really great example of why it is a good idea to keep 2 of these sheets, because you may have 8 people planned, and you may want to keep that sheet saying, hey, my bosses, everybody who's in charge of like the actual service level and that you're explaining it to, here's what our plan is. We're going to get 8 people in. We're going to be set up. And then when that day comes, maybe only 5 people show up. So you can have that and say our actuals were only 5. So this is why we are going to be under now. And you can see the deltas there, the differences. Or you can play with the numbers back and forth. So a couple different ways that you can do that here. And that is your class starts, helps you get the hiring plans. There's still going to be some work needed because the system's not going to make a perfect hiring plan for you. But it helps build that out right away so that you can kind of just plug in numbers and see what fits and go from there. Then you can adjust any of these other inputs up here too and be like, oh, if our volume was higher, how many more people do we need to hire? Where can I put these classes? Like I said, just keep an extra copy of this sheet. Google Sheets are cheap. Google's not charging you to have a whole bunch of these sheets. Just keep making copies and be like, here is iteration 1 with 20% growth and hiring jumped up by X percentage. And here's the exact scenario. So lots of things that you can do here. I know that was another big, long part of me talking. So let me pause to see if any questions came in on the new hires here.
Yes, we did have 2 questions come in. So the first one is, what is the productivity duration of 1 FTE you considered here? Hope you considered it, or 7.5 hours per FTE.
Okay. So one of your productive FTEs is 42.5 hours minus your 30% shrinkage. And that's how many productive hours we are expecting from them per week. I'm not going to try to do that math right off the top of my head because I'll just embarrass myself by getting it wrong. But that is your people that have graduated, that have hit the floor. That is how many hours we are expecting from each of them every week. And actually, somebody had a really great point last week, and I didn't add it in just for extra complexity. But let's say we wanted to bring down their occupancy as well to 90 or 85% or something. You can either increase this shrinkage number here, which is maybe a little bit of a hacky workaround, which reduces the hours that they give productive per week, which then in turn puts the sheet to tell you, hey, we need to hire more, which will lower their occupancy. Or if you're comfortable with it, you can add an occupancy modifier in here and do the same sort of thing. It's up to you, and I can help walk through this too if there are those kind of asks. So that's how much you get for a productive person. For the people in training, just to make it simpler without their specific handle times and things like that going in and weighing in, I just put that they're doing 7.5 hours of ticketing per week. So over that 42.5 hours, they lose 2.5 to lunch, and then the rest of the time is free for their trainers to do whatever it is that they need to do. Whether it's actually doing modules, listening to mock calls, maybe they need to go and pet puppies for a little bit because it's getting a little stressful. That's fine. As long as we get the 7.5 hours of ticketing per week, that's what we're assuming. And since it's in yellow, it's an adjustment that you can do in any direction you want. So hopefully that answers the question there. And I thought did we say there was 2, Val?
Yes, we've actually had a few more questions trickle in. So another question, for week 1, the volume of 700 is for 5 working days, because volume tab has 5 days and 10 operating hours. So for 1 day, that is around 150 calls over 10 hours, question mark. It might be a bit easier if you read the question, Adrian, because there's a bit of numbers in here. Then you add 5.8 delta to full-time employees to starting headcount of 10. So it says you need 16 on the schedule to meet SLA for 150 calls for the day.
Okay. So I think maybe the confusion here is that everything on here is working on a particular week and not the particular day. So what I mean by that is you would have these sort of inputs, these sort of ideas, and then you would take to the specific daily, the specific interval. That's ideally where you would use something like a symbol, a workforce management system, because there's a lot of inputs here, right? We're kind of assuming all of our contact arrivals, but right now we're not really able to adjust for intraday contact arrivals that change off of like a base pattern that we're doing. People call out, shrinkage gets moved around throughout the day. That's where something that much more advanced than a spreadsheet, and you actually have a workforce system do that. So I think in theory, if you had 700 volume, and to be clear, this 700 volume on week 1 is actually across 7 days. And just to give a recap there as well, it's because, or excuse me, across 5 days. You're right. I thought I had 7 in here. It is across those 5 days. And yes, the math of whatever this 24% of 700 is what arrives on that Monday in theory, right? We're aggregating that up is what we're seeing here. And then let's see, because the volume tab has 5 days and 10 operating hours. So for 1 day, I have 150 calls, 10 hours. Then you add the 5.8 delta FTE to the starting head count of 10. So it says you need 16 to schedule on that day. So yeah, this is another one where, because we're looking at the week versus the actual days, where that would be making some assumptions of, oh, we have the head count of 10, and then we have the 5.8 delta. All of those 10, maybe now it's a 5-day week 1, maybe they don't all work on Monday. I mean, some people work 4 10s, and maybe that's how you have it set up. So maybe you have 5 people that come in for the first half of the week and 5 people that come in for the second half of the week. These are just things that we're not going to be able to see, and that this planning isn't specifically designed to do, because there are those kind of minutiae, or people that have a weird split schedule. Maybe Monday isn't something they work. And it gets even crazier when you have weekends come in and maybe somebody works a weekend wrap and doesn't touch any of the middle of the days. So in theory, yes, you are getting close to that, where it'd be, okay, we need about 16 people for that day if everybody was scheduled for every single day. And I love that you're actually kind of like figuring out these things that this isn't exactly designed for. I would just say, be cautious on saying this is the end all be all, since it wasn't designed to answer that. But if you're comfortable rolling with that and testing and going back and adjusting things afterwards, then by all means, see if that works out. If that gives you what your actual business needs, then go with it.
Fantastic. All right, Adrian, we had another question on the 30% shrinkage. Does this include lunch and or out of office shrinkage too?
Yes, it should. The reason that I have 42.5 hours, when I think there's a question here, I've always subtracted like lunch and maybe lunch and break from there, is lunch is usually like everybody's going to have it, and it's the thing that's unpaid that everybody's going to have. But I'll just put it in there because it's on the books and we can drop it down. If you want to say throw lunch out and just do 40 hours a week and then shrinkage from there, great. The shrinkage from there, that is this input right here, that is definitely one that, if you remember from last time, you should be looking at your historical information and gathering the average shrinkage. And you're going to plot in breaks and team meetings and coachings, and all of that's probably going to get you all the way up into the teens of percentage anyways, just doing the math. That's just how it works out, maybe even into the low 20s. But then go ahead. You may not know exactly when ad hoc trainings or somebody needs to be pulled twice for a coaching that week. And that's why you look at the averages or the call outs. And once again, the averages come up to your help there, whether you've got no call, no shows, or just planned PTO or any sort of absence codes. You put that into your shrinkage there because you want to take the raw hours that theoretically somebody could provide and then cut it down with all the assumptions there. I've got a single shrinkage number here, but just like we did before with talking about occupancy, you could, and I'm just going to make a real quick suggestion here, you could maybe have a whole bunch of your shrinkage things outlined here. So there's absence and so on and so forth. And if you just summed them all up to be your total shrinkage here, the formulas would still work. You could just say that this cell equals the sum of your shrinkage outlined here. Done. Formulas are still going to work. And then you can track each one individually and be like, oh, we want them all. We want each specific part of the shrinkage to trend at these rates. And if we see it go up or down, then we can go ahead and change from there and have it broken out a little bit more than just an overall 30% number. So I hope that answers the question there. If not, you can definitely reframe and ask again, or we can always take this offline in emails or things like that too. So, and did any more come in, Val, or did I grab them all? Oh, Val, I think you're on mute.
Oh, yes. sorry, we actually have one more.
Okay.
I've always subtracted lunch and break time from full-time employee weekly hours. Adding like you have doesn't lower the actual number needed, question mark. For example, we never have someone that works less than 40 hours. They are FTE 8 hours a day, but also have breaks. So I'd put 7.5 times 5 days. I'd like to know how you view it instead.
Okay, I think this is similar to the question that was just asked before. So to keep this from being a bunch of different rows, there's some math that's done in formulas that's not explicitly showed here. But basically, each of your 10 people, they get reduced by the shrinkage around here. And then that gives you your full-time equivalent of like the productive full-time hours that you're going to get per person. Because you can mathematically say, oh, I have 20 FTEs worth of work, but I'm getting it across 50 people because they all work part-time, but they're still giving me full-time employees worth of work because it all adds up to that much. So that's how I'm getting where you're taking your staff and you're dropping it down. As for the delta of your FTEs, how many they're actually under, what that's doing is it's taking the actual negative or positive hours and incorporating the shrinkage that is assumed in there. So it's not just 174 divided by 42.5 for this delta. It's actually, if we look at the formula here, it's taking that 174 and then working in the shrinkage as well. So we know that it's not exactly 174 divided by 42.5, which would be less than the 5.8. So it's taking in the shrinkage account on that side as well. So that's roughly what your 7.5 would be doing, because that is it's a small amount of shrinkage, but that is a shrinkage percentage right there. And the 7.5 is just doing it in reverse for the new hires here. And it's only for the new hires of this account, and just says, forget shrinkage. It's probably going to be a crazy high number. It might even freak people out. It's probably not even a useful metric in new hires. It's just somewhere over that entire week of new hires, we are expecting them to give us about 7.5 hours of productive time. And it's just working backwards into the math and giving you the net hours versus reducing the gross headcount by the shrinkage to get those. So it's a really, really, really wordy answer. I hope that explained it well enough and I didn't stumble through it. And if not, same thing. Maybe we can, if you want to kind of target the question a little bit more, we can take this offline in emails, or hopefully maybe if you rewatch it and slow me down to like 50% if I talk too fast, that might help too, to kind of explain it from there. All right, Val, did I get all the questions there?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, cool. So we're going to jump back over to our friend, the slides, and go into the financial part. Now, this thing is where people go, oh my gosh, it's financials. It's kind of scary. In my mind, yes, it's money. So that's what a lot of people are going to be focused on, and it can be scary that way. But actually how we get there, at least to get a ballpark or get really close based off of all the knowledge we've been putting in there, is not terribly hard. And I will show you how I did that on the other sheet. But you might look at cost per next year or over X time frame. I'll show you another sheet. The costs, the assumed costs, and even overtime, if you want it, are actually just planned into there. And so you can just sum up for the next 52 weeks, for the next 18 months, whatever it is, and say, oh, here's what our costs are expected to be. And the cool thing is, since this is a spreadsheet doing all the math, and you don't have to do the math, if you wanted to go in and add new hire classes and do different scenarios, the costs will adjust with it because they're based on the amount of hours that you're bringing in. And then somebody actually had a really good idea last time for if your deficit hours, if those are like overtime hours. So I'll show you how I kind of assumed those as like a 1.0 multiplier, or excuse me, a 1.5 multiplier for overtime, which will increase costs as well. So that's there. Snapshots and monthly iterations. Not to sound like a broken record here, but keep those different copies. Keep another copy of the sheet. Take a snapshot of it. And literally just say, make a copy of this specific one and then just save it and never touch it again. Because it's not going to pull in any other data. Nothing's going to be messed with it again. And you can go back and say, okay, I've done all my work. We pushed out this capacity planning. Maybe we do it once a month, which is a good idea. Around the 15th of the month is a great idea. And say, okay, February's capacity plan for the next 2 years is done. Save it, put it in a folder, and then in 3 months, in 6 months, if somebody comes back and says, hey, what was our projected at the beginning of the year? You can say, don't worry, boss, I got this. And you can go back to that February one. Here's exactly what it was. And then you can compare maybe your most current one to that and say, here's all the variances. And then these variances are why we got to X cost from there. So lots of different scenarios to do. That's just one way to do it. You can do it however you want. And then the other one here is to use actuals. So we talked about this, especially in like the attrition, put in the actuals. If you wanted to keep that second version, so maybe you have your monthly look ahead versions that you saved, and now you've got your maybe like live current version and then live actual version. Any of the inputs, you plug in the actuals for it as well. The calculations will go through, give you what the actual was for that week, and you can see, okay, were you over or under, and so on and so forth. Really, really powerful one to do there. And so let's just jump back in and kind of show just some real quick ways of doing that. Literally make a copy, whatever you should be doing, putting in your actuals for your headcount here. If maybe attrition did not actually take it down and it was truly 10 people because nobody left, because it is such an awesome place to work, which is great. So we don't change anything there. And one last pro tip is you can also freeze some of these particular rows, which can be helpful as well. And so what I mean by freezing, and I'll show you the way that I do it, I'm not sure if this is the best one, is if you copy an entire row and you paste special values, it's going to kill all the formulas in that row, but keep all of the numbers. The reason I do this, and you can ask me the pain of why I learned to do this, is because if you go through and you start to change some of these assumptions, which is great, you should be changing these assumptions as the year goes on and things adjust. It's an Excel spreadsheet that I wrote, so it is okay. It is not Chat GPT where it's going to figure everything out for you. So it will adjust things in the past. So if as every week goes through, you just freeze it, then you don't have to worry about it impacting anything when you change your variables in the past. That's what it was. It's done. Now we're just looking forward and changing what's upcoming. So another little pro tip there. And I know we are marching through the time here, so I am going to just go ahead and cover the cost part that I put at the bottom, and then I think I see a couple more questions. This is the staffing hours cost, which is very much as simple as your productive hours that are up here, which do combine the actual new hire hours that come in, times your average cost per hour. Once again, you can make this more advanced if you want to have new hire costs split off on their own thing. It's up to you. I just wanted to throw something in and show how it can be done quickly and easily. The assumed overtime is just anytime you have a negative delta of hours, that it's going to go ahead and times it by the OT rate, which I have a 1.5 multiplier because OT is probably going to cost you more, which is why you want to staff up for it. And then just summing up your total costs. So you can see, oh my gosh, it's going to cost us a lot for this particular week. And in the future, especially if you have any sort of deficits and you start plotting in your classes, you'll actually probably see, even though you now have people there, it's going to cost you less because you don't have that OT multiplier. So big word sandwich there. You can go through and modify and move these numbers as much around as you want. But let me pause again and see. I think I see maybe 4 new questions coming in, Val.
Yeah, we have a few more. So question is there a way to scale the average wage? For example, in December, wages will be increased 4%.
Great question. So right here, no, because I wanted to make this quick and easy. But if you wanted to, instead of having an average cost per hour that is just a universal setting here, just make another row and plug it in each time. I like to make rows to give some visual spacing so that it's not butted up right against here. Just make another row and put your $25 an hour or whatever it may be. And then in December, it's 25 plus 4%. So I don't know, it's $26.50 or whatever that might be. And then just have your math go against that number instead of the one that is like a static for all the year up here. Pretty easy to do. Just insert a row and repoint some of the formulas from this particular cell to the cell above and drag it over. I have made it where pretty much any row, as long as you don't start on this first row, because there's kind of some kickoff things that happen in the first row, any row that is L or more, you can just copy and paste it exactly over and all the formulas will work. Just shift it over to the right, So you can do the same on yours if you're making some modifiers. Great question.
Fantastic. We have another question from Nate. A question I get asked by my stakeholders is if we added one FTE, how does that impact both our AFRT or our SLA performance? I know that in general, that is more of a scheduling problem than a capacity planning one. Any advice on how to use an Erlang calculator such as this one to do that?
Yeah, so that's going to be a little bit beyond the scope, but it is a great question. Because people want to say, yeah, if I add one person and they cost a lot of money, right? We're doing an average cost per hour, but to be honest, there's health insurance, everything that goes in beyond that, which can be a lot. The way to do that is because when you place an FT, you place one person and you want to get some pretty accurate, what is service level going to be? You really want to have this broken out with your volumes and your staffing to the interval level itself. And not just at that weekly level. You can add a person onto here and basically be like, okay, if we are positive, we're probably going to be around the 95% goal, plus or minus a couple percent. If we're below that, it's going to start to drop down. But you would probably want to go in and have this plotted in to your workforce system at that particular level. I know that there are formulas out there that you can calculate the basically, are we going to meet service level by looking at the staffing and so on and so forth? But from what I've seen, they need the same thing. They need to see it by interval. They need to see staffing and the volumes butted up together. We've only got part of that implied with the arrival patterns of the volume and not on the staffing side. So unfortunately, wouldn't exactly grab it here. If somebody who is really, really, really good at math and statistics or whatever can prove me wrong that there's a good way to do this, that's not going to be impossible to implement, I am all ears. I would love to learn and see if there's a great way to do this at the weekly level without having to build out like interval level staffing patterns. I'm happy to learn if somebody's got that out there and wants to share it. But great question. Sorry, I don't have like a very specific answer for here besides, a workforce system is probably going to be your option at that point. And Val, what's another one?
So we actually don't have any other questions, but folks, feel free to pop any others in.
Okay. Well, I think that was heading up to the end. I had a slide here for wrap-up questions, but it looks like we have got there. So maybe just I'll recap a little bit as to what we've gone over, and we can go through this kind of quickly here. So covered all the inputs. Everything that you're going to put into the sheet is going to be in yellow. There's instructions on the sheet. You start off with your demand, which is going to be your workload, and then you build up your supply, which is your staffing. Staffing is real important to look at your, there we go, attrition, because the attrition is the silent killer of your staffing. If you get up to 100, 200, 300, 1,000 people, even just that small percentage of attrition every year, which if you're running a small percentage of attrition, great. You are running an awesome business that people aren't leaving, and kudos to you. It will still eat up a bunch of people. Think of 10% attrition on 1,000 headcount. That's 100 people you got to hire up a year just to stay where you were, and not even the growth that your company is going to see, because I know you're rocking it out and you're going to have 20% growth. So you're looking at 10% of backfill and then everything else to grow on top of that. And you can see that it can be a hard ask of your training team, which is why you are going to have a capacity plan to really enable them to know ahead of time and not be caught on their back foot every time. So attrition, you can work that into hiring plans. We showed how to do that. The hiring, this is a more simplistic model, but you can work with your training teams to figure out when they can fill classes, how they're going to fill them up, plot them into here, track your actuals, and actually see how you're looking going forward. And then, of course, your financials. You plug in a specific dollar number. You can change that weekly by just doing a quick modification to it, however you feel fit. But I did add that on there really quickly to show you that it can be done. And since I'm talking about it, if anybody does want to add this without having to redo their sheet, if you just copy this section here, you can copy the entire thing and then paste it in the exact same spot, or even just these last two sections, not the whole row, just these two sections, and paste them underneath. And then copy and paste these rows as well to the exact same place in your sheet. I'm going to say with 87% certainty that it will work flawlessly for you right out the gate. So feel free to copy and paste this over or shoot me an email or something if there's any sort of confusion there. and we can go from there. And then since I don't know that I see any other questions, and we have just a couple minutes left, I'm going to leave it here with, I know this was a lot to absorb. This was 2 hours of your time over a couple weeks. So thank you for giving us the time. If you are interested in continuing this further, Val is going to send out with our recap email here a sign-up sheet if you want to get onto the wait list for actually doing capacity planning with Assembled. And it's going to start off as like sessions with me as well. If that's something that you or your company is interested in looking at, we're happy to help and to go through and make this a better situation for you versus just learning it. Sometimes being hands-on is going to help a lot better. So with that being said, Val, are there any other questions or anything else before I wrap it up fully?
No other questions. I think one other last thing is we always love to chat with you all and learn more about what is top of mind, preview our roadmap, and so much more. So if you're interested in continuing conversations with our team as well, I'm just going to release a poll. And for any of y'all who selected yes, I will follow up with additional details. But thank you so much, everyone. So great seeing you all as always.
Thanks all. Thanks for joining. Hope to talk to you soon.
Bye, folks.